The most humiliating moment of Anna Calloway's life was not the 48 hours she spent in a hole in the ground overseas waiting for her team to pull her out. She had always assumed that one would hold the record. She was wrong. It was a Thursday afternoon in February in a conference room off Connecticut Avenue, and Victor Salter had just read her father's will aloud. Anna's name appeared once. She received nothing. Someone behind her made a small sound. Her half-brother Marcus, sitting to their father's left, let the smile he had been managing since she walked in finally do what it wanted. Gerald watched her face the way you watch a door you expect to open any second. Anna looked at Victor Salter and said quietly, "Victor, are you sure you know everything that's in front of you?" The room went still in a specific way. Salter's composure moved not much, just enough for someone watching carefully to catch it. Gerald's voice came across the table. "Sure about what? What does that mean?" Marcus looked from Anna to Gerald and back. The young attorney beside him stopped writing. Nobody in that room knew what she meant. She did. And the silence that followed her question was the kind that only happens when something has shifted and nobody is quite sure yet what it is. To understand why that question landed the way it did, you have to go back further than this room. Anna Calloway was 32 years old, a major in the United States Army Military Intelligence. She had a Bronze Star with Valor and a second decoration she didn't mention unless someone asked directly. And almost no one did, because something in the way she carried herself discouraged that particular line of conversation. She had spent the better part of a decade on assignments she didn't describe at dinner parties, not out of drama, just out of habit. Some things you stop trying to translate into civilian language, because the translation always loses something essential, and after a while you stop attempting it. Washington, D.C. was the city on her official records. It was not quite the city she lived in. It was the city she returned to between departures, the place where she kept her winter coat and her tax documents and a phone charger that actually worked. For most of the year, the Georgetown apartment sat without her in it, holding her things in the stillness of a place that is waiting. The apartment had belonged to her grandmother Ruth, who died 5 years ago at 91, and left it to Anna in a will that bypassed Gerald Calloway entirely. 3 rooms. A pre-war brick building 2 blocks from the Potomac, hardwood floors that caught the afternoon light in a way that made the whole place feel older and quieter than the city outside. And one spot near the doorway of the second room where the floor had always creaked the same note, the same give underfoot every single time. Anna had known that sound since she was small enough that the creak was at eye level with her. Ruth had never fixed it. Anna had never asked her to. She came back in October after 18 months away. She turned the key, pushed the door open, walked to the kitchen the way she always did first, and stood at the window looking out at the river. The water was dark. The light was going. She stood there long enough that the kettle finished boiling and she didn't move to pour it. At some point, she realized her face was wet. She hadn't noticed it happening. That surprised her more than the crying itself, that her body had done something without asking her first. It had been a long time since anything caught her off guard that way. She poured the tea eventually. She sat on the wide windowsill where Ruth used to keep pots of geraniums and watched the light leave the water. Some places don't just hold memories. They hold the version of you that existed before the world started asking you to be harder. That night Anna decided whatever else happened, she was not selling this apartment. Now, to understand why that decision mattered, you have to understand who had always had a problem with it. Gerald Calloway had built Calloway Group from a 2-man operation into one of the more successful regional developers in the D.C. suburbs, and he was a man who understood at a cellular level that things should go to the people who had earned them. By his accounting, he had earned the Georgetown apartment. He was Ruth's only son. He had grown up in that building or near enough. And when Ruth's will was read 5 years ago and the apartment went to Anna, his daughter, who was almost never in the country, who had made clear for years that her life pointed away from this family and toward something she wouldn't fully explain, he received that information as a judgment. Not a legal document. A judgment. He never screamed about it. He said what he thought in the way people say things they fully intend to be remembered evenly more than once in front of witnesses. She felt sorry for you, he told Anna at a family dinner roughly 2 years ago, his voice carrying the patience of someone explaining something obvious. You were always gone. She thought you needed it more. He said it like it was concern. It landed like a verdict. Marcus was 26 and had been working for Calloway Group for 3 years. He was good at the job, present, reliable. fluent in the language of the business, and he occupied his position in the company the way someone occupies a role they have been prepared for since childhood. He never said anything unkind to Anna directly. He was too careful for that. He simply looked at her in a way that communicated without a single word that he had already determined where she fit in the family's future, and it was not anywhere that mattered. Diane had been Gerald's wife for 20 years. She was quiet in the way that certain effective people are quiet, not because they have nothing to say, but because they have learned that silence costs nothing and reveals nothing and leaves every option open. Anna had underestimated her for most of her adult life. That was probably the most honest mistake she ever made. Anna's mother had died of cancer when Anna was 9. Fast as these things sometimes go, 1 year between the diagnosis and the end. Gerald remarried 2 years later. Anna learned not to cry at the funeral because she could see that crying would not help anything, and she never quite unlearned the habit of holding it in. She thought sometimes that this was part of why the army had suited her. There is a specific exhaustion that comes from spending years being underestimated by the people who are supposed to know you best. She had been tired in that way for a long time before she ever put on a uniform. And none of it had anything to do with the dinner in McLean until it did. He called the landline. That was the first thing Anna noticed. Not her cell, which he had, but the landline she had restored at the request of her downstairs neighbor and mentioned to Gerald once briefly at some family event over the summer. He had remembered it. He had chosen it. That was a small thing, and she filed it without comment in the back of her mind next to other small things that might eventually add up to something. The invitation was for Saturday dinner in McLean. He said Diane was cooking, said Marcus would be there. Said it would be good to catch up. She had been home 6 weeks, her first real leave in 3 years. And the days had been quiet in a way that made her professionally uneasy. She had spent enough time in situations where quiet preceded something that she had stopped trusting it on principle. She said yes. The McLean house was large brick 3-car garage, professionally landscaped even in November. The driveway long enough to give you time to register the scale of the place before you reached the front door. Diane answered in a cashmere sweater with a glass of wine already in her hand and the same composed smile she always wore, the one that gave nothing away in either direction. Marcus was in the living room. Gerald came out of his office. The 4 of them sat down to dinner like a family that did this regularly, which they did not. Diane had made roast chicken and something with root vegetables and a salad that required more effort than it appeared to. The conversation moved through safe material a project Calloway Group had broken ground on in Loudoun County. A new car Marcus was considering, the weather, the traffic on the Beltway. Anna answered when addressed and ate and waited. She had learned a long time ago that patience in a room where something is building is not passivity. It is information gathering. Gerald set down his fork after the dessert plates were cleared. He looked at Anna the way he looked at problems he had already solved in his head. The Georgetown apartment, he said, should be sold. The market was strong. The place sat empty most of the year. It wasn't reasonable holding on to it. He used the word divided. They could divide the proceeds, make it fair, move forward. The word sat in the middle of the table, like something he had placed there deliberately. Anna said no. Once, clearly, without elaboration. Gerald pressed her name on a deed for a property she never used. It didn't make sense. Ruth would have understood. Anna said no again. Diane set down her wine glass and said pleasantly that no one was rushing her. The words were reasonable. The tone underneath them was something else entirely, a door being held open just long enough to make sure you understood it was there. Anna left an hour later. She drove back into the city, on the interstate, the highway lit and moving, and she ran the evening the way she ran a debrief, sequentially, without sentiment. What had been said? What had not been said? What the word divided had actually been doing in that sentence, given that the apartment was hers, had been hers for 5 years, and no division of any kind had ever been legally on the table. Most people would have driven home thinking their father was being pushy. Anna drove home thinking this was the first conversation, not the last. Whatever they were building, they had just told her it had already started. 3 weeks into December, Anna stopped by Tanya Brower's office to pick up a notarized copy of a document she needed for her personnel file. Tanya had been a friend since high school, one of those connections that survives long gaps and different lives because the foundation was solid enough to hold. She worked out of a small office in Foggy Bottom, 2 rooms and a reception desk built on referrals and repeat clients. Anna had been there maybe 4 times in the past decade. She did not expect the visit to be anything other than a quick exchange and a signature. Tanya closed the door before Anna had finished sitting down. She said she wanted to share something just as a friend and asked if that was all right. A man had come into her office the previous week. He introduced himself as a representative of Calloway Group and asked detailed questions about durable power of attorney for real property, what it covered, how it was executed, what was required to file it with the D.C. Recorder of Deeds. He was thorough. He knew which questions to ask, which meant someone had already done preliminary research before sending him. Tanya had answered in general terms and declined to take him on as a client. Something about the conversation had not felt right to her, and she trusted that instinct. She thought Anna should know. Anna drove back to Georgetown and went directly to the file box she kept in the closet, the one with the apartment's title documents. Ruth's will, the deed of transfer, the co-op association records. She went through everything. It was all there, all correct, all in order. She put it back and called Colonel Frank Deering. Deering had been her commanding officer for 3 years before he retired and moved to a property outside Fredericksburg. He did legal consulting now quietly for people he knew personally. He did not advertise and he did not take cold calls. Anna had his number in her phone under a name that was not his. She told him what Tanya had told her. He listened without interrupting, which was one of the things she had always respected about him. Then he told her what to do. The call ran 20 minutes. She wrote down every word. She came back from a 10-day temporary assignment in early January and found Mr. Patterson waiting near the elevator on the ground floor. He was 71, had lived in the building since 1987 and knew every resident by name and schedule. 2 men had come by while she was gone, he said. They told the neighbors they were from the building management company. They asked how often Anna was home, whether she ever rented the unit out, how long she had owned it. Mr. Patterson had not liked them. He had not answered their questions, and he had remembered their faces. That same evening Anna took the metro to a notary office on M Street that Deering had recommended, a woman who ran a small independent practice and had no prior connection to anyone in Anna's family. They met for 45 minutes. Anna signed specific documents. The notary worked without asking anything beyond what was necessary, which was exactly what Anna needed. She didn't know yet precisely what they were building on the other side. But she knew enough to start building something first. What she didn't know was how far along they already were. Gerald called on a Tuesday evening a little after 9. Anna was in the kitchen and she almost didn't pick up. She had been reading and the hour was late enough to suggest nothing urgent. But she picked up and she knew within the first few seconds that something about the call was different. His voice had a steadiness she couldn't immediately place, not anger, not the low-grade bitterness that had colored most of their conversations about the apartment, but the calm of a man who has already decided how something ends and is now simply moving through the remaining steps. He told her he had been to see his cardiologist. Nothing catastrophic, he said, but enough to make a man think about getting his affairs in order. He had updated his will. There would be a formal reading at his estate attorney's office in 3 weeks. Victor Salter's office, she knew the firm on Connecticut Avenue. He wanted her there. It was the right thing to do, he said, to have the whole family present. She said she would be there. They hung up. She stood in the kitchen for a moment, then called Deering. He listened to the whole thing before he spoke. Then he said, "This isn't about his estate, Anna. It's about yours. Look into Salter." She asked what she was looking for. He said, "Start with how long Salter has been doing work for Calloway Group and then look at what kind of work." It took her 2 days. Victor Salter was by every visible measure a competent and well-regarded estate attorney, with 30 years of practice and a clean record. He had also handled a considerable volume of transactional work for Calloway Group over the past several years, and some of that work, when she looked carefully at the timing and the structures involved, was harder to account for cleanly. Nothing that would survive as a headline, but enough to establish that Salter and Gerald had a relationship that went beyond the occasional referral, and that Salter had a history of finding ways to be useful when asked. 1 week before the will reading, Tanya called. Her voice had a tightness Anna recognized as controlled urgency, the sound of someone who has found something and is being careful about how they carry it. They agreed to meet in an hour. The cafe near DuPont Circle was small and quiet on a weekday afternoon. Neither of them went there regularly, which was the point. Tanya sat down, ordered nothing, and put her phone on the table face up without saying anything. On the screen was a document. Durable power of attorney for real property dated November of the previous year. The granting party was listed as Anna Calloway. The authorized party was Calloway Group. The property described was a Georgetown co-op unit at an address Anna knew by heart. The document granted Calloway Group authority to manage lease and make disposition decisions on that property. It had already been filed with the D.C. Recorder of Deeds. A contact of Tanya's at that office had flagged it during routine processing. Something about the signature had not looked right to her. She had held the file and called Tanya. Anna looked at the document for longer than it took to read it. Her hands were flat on the table. Her pulse was where she needed it. But something behind all of that went cold in a way that had nothing to do with training and everything to do with understanding what had almost happened without her knowing. She had never signed that document. The signature was hers in the way that a practiced imitation is close enough to pass a casual review, not close enough if someone was actually looking. Tanya's contact had been looking. She told Tanya to make copies and store them in at least 3 separate places, and to say nothing about where the document came from. Not yet. Tanya nodded. They left separately. Outside on the sidewalk, Anna stopped at a convenience store on the corner and bought a pack of cigarettes she had quit 3 years ago and stood outside and smoked one while her mind finished working through it. Someone had forged her signature on a legal document and filed it with the city. The apartment was already in the process of being taken. If Tanya's contact hadn't flagged it, the whole thing would have moved through quietly, and at some point Anna would have woken up to find the property was no longer hers. She finished the cigarette, dropped it, and called Deering. She told him she had everything she needed. He told her what to do with it. That night she made 2 decisions: retain the fraud attorney Deering had already identified and begin the process of transferring the Georgetown Apartments title to the Shield Foundation, a veterans nonprofit, as a temporary legal shelter. The transfer would be clean, recorded, and reversible once the threat had passed. 3 weeks later she walked into Victor Salter's office in a navy suit with a thin blue folder in her bag, and they walked in thinking she knew nothing at all. She arrived at 2 o'clock exactly. Navy suit, white shirt, hair pulled back, no jewelry. If you knew what to look for, you would have seen a person dressed the way she dressed when the work required precision. Victor Salter was already at the head of the table. Gerald sat at the far end, posture settled, the look of a man who had decided the afternoon was a formality. Marcus was to his left in a jacket that was slightly too new, his attorney beside him with a legal pad already open. Diane sat just off Gerald's right, composed and still. Anna took the chair directly across from Marcus, set her bag on the floor, placed the thin blue folder on the table in front of her, and folded her hands on top of it. Salter read through the preliminary language, the date of execution, the declaration of competency, the standard architecture of a formal will. Anna listened and watched the room the way she had been trained to watch rooms, which is to say she appeared to be doing nothing while she was doing quite a lot. Marcus checked his phone once, then set it face down, the gesture of someone who already knows the ending and is simply waiting for the credits. Gerald kept his eyes forward. The McLean properties came first. All 3 in full to Marcus Calloway. Then the Calloway Group assets split equally between Marcus and Diane. Diane's posture shifted by a degree that most people in the room would not have noticed. Anna noticed. Then Salter reached the final line and Gerald spoke it himself, which had not been the procedure up to that point. He turned toward Anna and said it with a deliberateness that made clear he had been saving it. She received nothing. He watched her face. Marcus let the smile arrive completely. Anna looked at Victor Salter and said, in the same tone she might use to ask a clarifying question in a briefing, "Victor, are you certain you have a complete picture of what's in front of you?" Salter's composure moved. "Not much. Enough." She opened the blue folder and placed the first document on the table. It was a notarized deed of transfer dated January 23rd of the current year, recorded with the D.C. Recorder of Deeds, conveying her Georgetown co-op to the Shield Foundation, a registered veterans nonprofit. The transfer was complete. The apartment had not been her personal property since January 23rd. Which meant that even if someone held a power of attorney purportedly signed by her, there was nothing left for it to act on. But beyond that, and this was the part that mattered more, the power of attorney itself was fraudulent. The signature on it was not hers. It had never been hers. The document was invalid from the moment it was created, and the evidence establishing that had already been transmitted by her attorney to the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Columbia that morning. She placed the second document on the table without pausing. It was a title search record on one of the 3 McLean properties just named in the will. The property carried a lien loan secured against it by Marcus Calloway the previous year, issued by a private lender due 6 months ago. The loan had not been repaid. Gerald turned and looked at his son. Marcus opened his mouth and did not say anything. The young attorney beside him stopped writing and looked at his legal pad as though reconsidering everything on it. The room was no longer moving in the direction it had been moving since 2 o'clock. She hadn't raised her voice once. She hadn't needed to. The documents did everything. Salter asked for 15 minutes alone with Gerald. The 2 of them stepped out and the remaining 4 people in the room did not speak. Marcus's attorney made a show of reviewing his notes. Marcus sat with his forearms on the table and looked at the middle distance. Diane was still. Anna waited with the ease of someone who has already done the difficult part and knows it. When Salter came back, he sat down with the careful movements of a man who has just understood the full shape of something he walked into without enough information. He did not look at Gerald when he resumed his seat. He looked at the table, then at Anna, running the calculation of how far in he was and what the least damaging exit looked like from here. Marcus spoke first. He said the power of attorney situation was a misunderstanding, his voice carrying the rehearsed reasonableness of someone who had prepared that sentence in advance. Anna looked at him and asked simply whose misunderstanding it was. He said her name as though beginning a different kind of answer. She waited. He did not finish the sentence. The smile that had been his default expression for the entirety of the afternoon did not return. Diane said they should take a short break. Her voice was exactly as controlled as it had been all day, but the small constant smile was gone. And what had replaced it was something Anna had seen before in high-stakes rooms, a person absorbing new information and already adjusting. She looked at Anna directly, possibly for the first time that afternoon, and what was in that look was not hostility. It was assessment. Anna said she wanted to put a few things on the record before anyone left the table. She went through it in order: the power of attorney bearing her forged signature filed with the D.C. Recorder of Deeds in November. The employee at that office who had flagged the document and whose account was part of the criminal referral already submitted that morning. The deed of transfer to the Shield Foundation dated January 23, which made the forged document unenforceable, even setting aside its fraudulent origin. And the undisclosed lien on the McLean property, now 6 months in default. She was not making threats. She was stating facts, and she was stating them in front of Victor Salter, who had certified documentation related to the power of attorney filing through his office and who was now a witness to every word spoken in this room. Salter suspended the reading. He asked for the name and contact of her attorney. She wrote it on the back of a plain note card, the fraud specialist, not Deering, and slid it across the table. There is a certain kind of outcome that does not announce itself. The room was very quiet and nobody in it looked the way they had 2 hours earlier, and that was enough. The air outside was cold and clear, the way February in D.C. gets when the sky has nothing left in it. No cloud cover, no warmth, just pale light coming in low from the west, and the smell of a city in winter exhaust and stone, and something faintly metallic. Anna stood on the front steps and let the cold settle around her. Gerald came out alone. No Marcus, no Diane. He stood beside her on the steps and looked out at the street, and for a long moment neither of them said anything. The sidewalk moved with the ordinary late afternoon traffic of people who had somewhere to be and no reason to look up. He asked whether she had known. She said yes. Since November. He was quiet for a moment, then said she could have come to him. She asked whether he would have believed her. He didn't answer, which was the only answer that made sense. She told him the referral was already with the U.S. Attorney's office had been since that morning. He said Marcus was his son. She said Marcus was her brother. And neither of those things changed what had been filed at the Recorder of Deeds or what it meant or what came next. There was nothing accusatory in her voice. She picked up her bag, came down the last 2 steps and walked toward the parking garage on the next block. She didn't look back. He didn't call after her. The sun was still up, barely, sitting low over the rooflines and throwing long shadows across the pavement. She didn't feel triumphant walking away. She felt tired. The good kind, the kind that comes after you've finally put something down that you've been carrying for a long time. The investigation ran 4 months. A forensic documents examiner reviewed the power of attorney and confirmed the signature was not Anna's, executed by a different hand. Close enough for casual review and not close enough for a careful one. The employee at the Recorder of Deeds gave a formal statement. Victor Salter cooperated fully and named the person through whom the document had reached him. His cooperation was noted and his conduct became the subject of a state bar disciplinary review. Marcus denied everything, then denied most of it, then admitted to enough that the rest became academic. He received a suspended sentence with 3 years of probation, no prior record, and the apartment had not ultimately changed hands, which the court weighed. Diane had known. The investigators established that clearly enough for a civil finding, not clearly enough for criminal charges. She had always been precise about exactly how much she touched things. Gerald testified against his son. That by every account Anna received was the hardest thing he did in those 4 months, harder than the audit of Calloway Group that followed, which revealed the McLean lien was not Marcus's only financial problem. He had been moving money into outside structures for years, slowly enough that nothing had triggered a review until someone started looking. Gerald had not been looking. He was looking now, and each new finding was worse than the one before. In May, Gerald called and asked to meet. His suggestion was a park near the mall neutral ground. They walked for about 40 minutes. He apologized in the way people apologize when they are not practiced at it, with pauses in the wrong places and sentences that restarted before they finished. Anna walked beside him and listened. She didn't forgive on a schedule, but she listened, and that was something. Near the end of the walk he said Ruth had been right. Anna said Ruth usually was. They left it there. She reclaimed the apartment from the Shield Foundation that same month. Deering had designed the original transfer with exactly this in mind, a temporary shelter reversible once the threat was gone. It had worked the way it was supposed to. June. Anna on the wide windowsill of the Georgetown apartment, morning light coming off the Potomac in long bright lines across the floor. On the sill beside her was a small cactus in a terracotta pot that Tanya had brought to the housewarming Anna finally hosted in April. Tanya had said a cactus was the right plant for someone who knew how to survive. Anna had laughed genuinely, without effort, surprised by it. It had been a while since one of those. The floors still creaked in the same spot near the second room. She stepped on it every time she walked past. On purpose, just to hear it. Ruth left that apartment to the one person she knew would never let it go. Not out of stubbornness. Out of memory. Some things are not really about money at all, and the people who try to take them anyway are always wrong about what they're actually reaching for. If your family had ever tried to take something like that from you, something that had nothing to do with money, not really, what would you have done? Leave your answer in the comments. I'd genuinely like to know.